It's a pleasure. They just really just know it. It's like, yeah, just know.
Jefe,
Hey.
hoy está cumpliendo años mi hija, ¿me puede ver?
Ay, sí, qué buena. Ay, mamita. ¿Qué hace cumpliendo?
5 años.
Quédate por ahí, te la casa.
Sí, me fue bien con castellano.
Ay, ¿cómo fue la
Tengo reunión mañana.
Comfy? 1, 2, 3.
Alex, Alex.
One, two, three, one, 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 one. Yes. One, two, three, one. Guys. One, two, three. Hello, hello. How are you? Okay.
Well, that I don't know.
Good afternoon. How are you? Thank you. Very well. So, can you hear me over there? No. Now? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Yeah. So we should start then. So as the head of the Foreign Languages Department at ICESI, I would like to welcome you all to today's event. It is a pleasure for the department to be holding its second Applied Linguistics and ELT Colloquium, just 8 months after our first event back in December 2017, when we held our first academic poster exhibition, which fostered discussion around the topics of applied linguistics, ELT, and research in general. This reaffirmed the importance of research into applied linguistics and English language learning and teaching, now more widely recognized by teachers as well as academic experts in our Colombian context. In view of such positive response to the event, we decided to go further and to open up a space for more discussion into these topics. And here we are today. So it is no coincidence that we are here today. This is part of ICESI's role to contribute towards doing and promoting research in our discipline in order to improve current teaching and learning practices. The purpose of this colloquium, as well as of the different strategies of the Foreign Languages Department to consolidate a strong academic community, is to promote research and to encourage reflective practice in order to enhance pedagogical innovations and new knowledge in our field. This, of course, leading to consolidate our identities as researchers or as language teachers, or ideally, both. The teaching and learning of English take place in very dynamic contexts, in which the classroom is considered by some administrators, teachers, policymakers, etc., as a black box from which they expect certain outcomes without really understanding what happens in it. To do so, we must remember as pointed out by Karen Johnson in her book, Innovations in TESOL Teacher Education, A Quiet Revolution, that teaching and learning are institutionally situated and inherently social activities, and that knowing, thinking, and understanding come from participating in the social practice of learning and teaching in specific classroom and institutional situations. Having said this, the Foreign Languages Department and the Masters in TEFL have been promoting research in different areas of applied linguistics. To mention some titles, what does it take to teach English? Elementary school non-English teachers' perspectives on their teaching practice. The effect of the English language learning experience at university on the evolution of students' narratives about English. Enhancing intercultural competence through the implementation of online collaborative tasks, COIL. Transforming the activity of learning English through recontextualization, project currently being carried out by teachers at the department and an MA student. On the same track, we are taking on several initiatives with our teachers at the department to explore action research in class as part of two innovation projects called My Class, My Lab and Task-Based Learning in Class. To sum up, we hope the discussion that will take place in this colloquium may help you have an idea of the potential of research in our field, so that you can think of how to become a researcher practitioner and in turn contribute to our field of applied linguistics and ELT, which in our particular context is very much needed. May I introduce you to our moderator today. He's a full-time teacher of our Foreign Languages Department here at ICESI and organizer of today's event, Hector Biancha. Thank you very much and welcome.
Hello everybody and welcome. Let's officially start with the discussion of our colloquium, which will cover three main topics and a concluding one. But before we start, I want our panelists to introduce themselves really or very briefly so we can start with the discussion, okay? And thank you very much for being here. Why don't we start with Professor Timar?
Would you like me to introduce myself or to talk about the book?
Introduce yourself.
Just about right. Hello, my name's Tim Marr. I work here at ICESI as a visiting professor on the MA program, and I also work for Xi'an Jiaotong Liverpool University in China when I'm not writing books, which I shall attempt to sell you in a moment.
Hello, my name is Rosalba Cárdenas Ramos. I recently retired from Universidad del Valle, where I worked for, 28 years. And I have been working on teacher development. Still, I do several things, but I don't teach anymore. That's all. Thank you.
I am Diana Margarita Diaz. I am the Director of Graduate Programs in the School of Education Sciences here at the university.
Hi, I'm Jose from Universidad del Valle. I work, do I have to speak louder? No. You guys get me? Okay. Jose Aldemar Alvarez, but okay. You won't remember my full name by the end of this conversation anyways. But anyways, so I work as the coordinator of the emphasis on ELT education at Universidad del Valle. It's a doctoral program. I'm also have an appointment at the School of Language Sciences, and that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Maria Fernanda Puentes, and at the moment I'm unemployed. No, I'm a full-time PhD research student at the University of Roehampton, London, but I have worked at ICESI for many years in the past, and that's it basically.
Okay, so now we can start with our first team, and I want to ask Professora Rosalba and Jose Aldemar. Okay, so here comes the first question. As experienced researchers, We want to know what have been the challenges and dilemmas of doing research in our context, in Colombia, basically.
Will you start or shall I? Whatever? Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
All right. Okay, so you guys have the question, right? Okay. So I was thinking of this theme, and this is what I came up with. I would say that a way to answer this question is by thinking of three elements: the what, the how, and the who. And kind of like part of the answer to this question comes from my experience. Of course, I've been doing research in applied linguistics during many years now, and I'm also part of different academic committees or reviewing committees from different universities, journals in Colombia. So I can see a lot of the publications that are, being published every semester in Colombia. And also, I've done some research, particularly reviews of literature, in which I've been able to see like the development of Colombian academia in terms of publications, research problems, and so on. So my question comes out of all of this. So regarding the what, I would say that doing research in Colombia in applied linguistics has developed in a very positive way. A couple of years ago, with a friend of mine, we conducted some research on the different types of research problems that Colombian academics are exploring. And we found that during the 80s and during the 90s, the research in Colombia was mostly focused on skills, how to do stuff in the classroom. Then during the 2000s, different topics started to emerge, like for example, culture, ICTs, call, CMC, and so on. So if we're talking about, because the question has to do with the current stage, right? So what I see is that we have grown a lot from that skill perspective, which I call instrumental, a very instrumental view of applied linguistics, Now we're doing more research on gender, literature, social issues, race, politics, and critical views too. So that's on the one hand, on the what, right? But I still see that this interest for the how is lingering a lot. I go to different master's programs in Colombia to teach, and what I find when I always ask students, what research are you doing? And I still listen a lot of people telling me how to improve speaking in the classroom, how to improve reading in the classroom. And when I have students coming to me telling me, do you wanna advise my thesis? And I ask them, so what's your research problem? And they tell me something like, I wanna do how to improve speaking. And I always like, you need to flesh it out. You need to put more flesh to it. Because what you're doing was 1919, 1980s Colombian academia, and now this has changed. So now we're like, why don't you say how to improve, speaking through intercultural topics? Something different, gender issues, political issues, stuff like that, that bring in more content to that, skill-based approach. So that's the what. Now the how, I see that Colombia has also, the research in applied linguistics in Colombia has improved in many ways. We see people doing more methods, but also genres of research, different genres. So now we have more narrative approaches. We have biographical approaches, genre-based research, multimodal research. We have mixed approaches, internet research also, and even feminism, right? Queer. We have a couple of people doing that now in Colombia. That's great. And we also have people doing research from the perspective of applied linguistics in indigenous communities, which is great in English language teaching. So it seems like all of these topics have sprung in the Colombian academia, and that's great. But I have to say that still the traditional, not in the bad sense, methodologies of exploring how to teach English better, that's still there. And I think it should stay, it should remain there, right? Because teaching is very important. That's the what and the how. Now the who. So when I think of who is doing research in applied linguistics in Colombia, what I find in research is that most research is concentrated in universities, and as opposed to research developed in schools. So there's different reasons for that, and one of the reasons is because no school is funding research. You know, if you work in a school, in elementary or high school, nobody's gonna tell you do research and you will have course releases, right? You do your teaching, right? So universities, you know, they fund more research. You know, they give you time and so on. So that's one of the reasons which creates a gap, right? And the problem we find is that when people do research in schools is because they're doing their master's program. Yes. And once the master's program is done, forget it. You become a teacher and that's it. You go back to being a teacher. So that's a gap. So I've talked about the what, the how, and the who, right? Do I have anything else here? Okay, the dilemmas, or the dilemmas. Right. So one of the dilemmas I find when thinking of research in Colombia and applied linguistics is that there is, in my view, a very limited view of what doing research is, what conducting research is. People tend to think that it's an act, it's an intellectual and of course an empirical act of collecting data, you know, analyzing data, and then writing your report. But there's more to it, because when you do research, you have an obligation to share your research, right? Doing research is like, imagine you wanna do research about something, but many people are already talking about that. It's a conversation that's going on, and you're new to that conversation. So you want to get into that conversation, right? So, but what I've seen here is that people do not get to the conversation in real terms. They kind of like read the literature and they know about the topic, but they don't go to conferences, they don't network, and so they just do that first part of doing the research, writing the report, possibly one article, and that's it. But they don't really get in the conversation with the people who are talking about that. So, and the dilemma is that we don't have the conditions to do that, though. You know, because, for example, some universities really, if you want to go to a conference to present your research, they give you a hard time for you to get some money to go to those conferences, right? Because that's where you're going to find the people to network, you know, and make groups and then conduct, for example, international research. That's kind of hard for us to do, you know, but that's also because we have a conception of doing research that still is very limited. I see that as a problem, but also as a dilemma of conducting research in Colombia. Another dilemma that I find is that, so the government nowadays is telling us, okay, so you have to produce, you have to do research, and then you have to have some citation index, which has to be high. You know, like people have to cite you. And of course, that's kind of like an indicator that you are part of the community and the conversation, right? You're not cited, you're not part of the conversation, right? So, and the dilemma is that the government is telling us you have to publish abroad, right? And let me tell you one example of one article I published a couple of years ago. This is an article in which I reviewed the development of the concept of culture in the ELT in Colombia. So I published this article in Journal of Intercultural Communication in Great Britain. And then that article matters a lot to Colombian academia, right? And very few people know about the article in Colombia, right? So kind of like if I had published it in Colombia, many more people would be talking about it. But now what I have to do is to, when I see people talking about that, like, oh, I have this article. Or people are writing to me, tell me, can you send me the article because it's $25 for me to get access to that article. You see? So it's kind of like contradictory that we've been forced to publish abroad, supposedly to be more visible, but we're not being visible here, where the research is more, pertinent. Yes. And I was thinking of what Johnny was saying. Teaching and learning are situated, so the research is also very situated, and that's one of the situations. So this local versus the global dynamics is complicated in Colombia. Okay, I'm gonna have to stop because I'm just taking over. All right, sorry.
Well, Dito, he said it all. I could like summarize, but I mean, really, he said it all. I'm going to try to. I'm going to try to take things like to the programs, like what would be the challenges, dilemmas for you as students. Probably that, because I mean, global things he said. Okay, for you as a student who is going into research, there is what to do, okay? Where to do it, and how to do it. What to do? Usually, when we are not, well, and we learn, in my case, I learned to do research doing it, because we had, in the year 2000, we had a new curriculum at Univalle for languages, and it introduced a large component of research compared to what we had before. That was like one course, and then suddenly we had 6. And we, the teachers, had to start, we had study groups and then research groups, and most of us learned to do, many of us learned to do research, teaching, and doing it without courses. I studied an MA in the States. I didn't have a formal course on research. I studied in England, and I didn't have a formal course on research. I had an advisor, and I did my work, but I didn't have courses on research. So we learned to do research, teaching and researching. So a dilemma and a problem for those who go into research is what to do. Usually, we think of things that are too big. I mean, we aim very high, and we have life projects instead of projects to be carried out in 1 year or 1.5 years. So one thing is to do something that is researchable within the time and conditions you have. Okay? Now, where? Most of you studying licenciaturas or MAs are already working, and you say, I'm going to do something at school. Okay, something, I'm going to improve something at school. Many times people say, I'm going to design a unit of teaching. And then, as Aldemar said, it's not like skills, but it is like something quite reduced, I would say, in scope. Say, well, a unit of teaching, yes, action research, I'll develop my unit, I'll implement it, I'll evaluate it, but many times that's very limited. Okay, so probably going into more challenging things. I mean, applied linguistics has widened up. Since I studied applied linguistics many years ago in England, many other areas have, many other disciplines are now part of applied linguistics, or many of the or the initial ones, have developed as areas of on their own, okay? So probably being a bit daring, and as Aldemar said, be more social cultural, be more critical. I mean, go beyond the limits of the classroom, which is not bad because we are teachers. And I mean, I know some universities in Colombia have like action research as the core of their research component. And they usually only do classroom research and action research. That's good. But we have to be a little more daring and not to be bound to a unit of teaching. Okay, go further. But remember, you don't have the rest of your life to do that. So try to, everything seems interesting. Everything sounds great. Oh, this, I want to add this, and I want to add this. And then you don't have time to do all that. So try to, yes, try to land your project and try to graduate on time. Okay, and then where? At school? Okay, working and doing your research where you work has many advantages. You know the people, you have access to documents, etc. But it also has disadvantages. Sometimes, if it is not your own classroom, but you have to go into some other people's classrooms, you start finding resistance. Sometimes passive resistance, sometimes open resistance. And then what to do? Should I get all the permissions and send letters to parents so they authorize me to do this and that with my students? Will my colleagues collaborate? I mean, many things. When you depend on others, probably things will go slower. Okay, so you can also think of something that depends on yourself, which is not too good because, I mean, teaching is social. I mean, it is sharing with others. But you have to consider all these aspects, taking into account the time you have. And you have to be, you have to dare. Okay, you have to dare. Now, there is a problem here. There is a dilemma. Probably the institution, when Aldemar said, the students go to you and say, I want you to be my advisor. What's your topic? Developing speaking skills. No, I mean, but we have the other extreme. Sometimes students, especially MA students, come with, I mean, the field has widened up so much that they come up with topics. We don't have experts in the area. We don't have anybody researching that. You as students and we teachers have to be able to expand the boundaries, like to learn a little bit with you. Anyway, we teachers have all the years and all the experience, okay, there, but we should be daring and try to learn with students. I mean, I have found some topics, I have not directed the studies, but I have found some topics that I knew nothing about. And fortunately, I didn't have to advise the students. I had to help them construct, design their project. Something like teoría de la valoración. I knew nothing about that. It is comparative analysis, and it is related with philosophy. And I mean, you have to say, well, I'll learn a bit about that. I won't be the advisor, but I will learn about that so I know that the theory the person has in the project is okay. Okay, I have found many things, like many projects in intercultural aspects, which is like that's the latest trend. But identity issues are also surfacing. Still, we have needs analysis, but we'll have to work on curriculum also, especially because of our situation in Colombia. Okay, there is a proposed curriculum. Okay, the government proposed a curriculum. It is suggested, but it is not so suggested if you have to, if your evaluations are going to be according to that. You have to I mean, probably go into curriculum, not to accept. Okay, pay attention to this. Some schools, some of my students have said, what's your project? I'm going to develop a curriculum for English in my new bilingual school. Seriously? I mean, curriculum is a collective construction. It is something that takes time. Don't let you be talked into something like this. But you can create a community of learning with your colleagues and do something that benefits not only your classroom, but their classrooms too. Okay? I mean, there are many things that can be done. Revise curriculum, I don't know, methodological procedures. Yes, we are teachers, but try to have not only now a lot of projects on task-based. Great. But I mean, try to go deeper into things. Okay, and I would say that creating communities with your fellow teachers, okay, with our colleagues, is good through study groups, lesson study groups, and research, learning together to do research and doing it that benefits the school, not only your classroom. Okay, I have not been so organized as he was because, I mean, seriously, you read this and he said it all. Okay, but I hope I gave some hints to you as new researchers. Okay, keep it manageable and consider the situation you have so you don't get into something you need too much of others and then you will be late, it won't give things to you. Okay, take these aspects into account and be daring. Okay, go beyond the unit of teaching.
So I want to say hello back, okay, to the people watching us in 209. And we have seen it and discussed it from a point of view, from a global point of view. Aldemar mentioned how, what, and who. Professora Rosalba Cárdenas, she focused on students or future researchers. But I want to know a new researcher who is currently working on her PhD, and I want to know and I want to know what have been like the challenges and realities for you in your case.
I think this is for Diana, right? I think that they've said it all, really. I have nothing to say. I'm so new at this. No, I think that they have covered certain aspects, but I would like to add some of my own kind of personal, based on my own personal experience. And I think I can say that from a teacher's point of view, in the MA program here at ISESI, one of the biggest challenges for doing research within our context, it's that people do not really know what is our field, what is our discipline, what is applied linguistics exactly. And two, that many people do not actually understand what is qualitative research. And from there, we tend to have all these other issues that Rosalba mentioned, such as students limiting themselves to doing basically just action research, thinking that everything has to be quantified and it has to be measured, and that anything that is based on experiences or points of view or perceptions is not valid, that is not serious research. So that for me as a teacher of the research methods in our MA program, that's something that I realized, and the Fundamentos Psicosociales, where students have their first attempt at research by doing an ethnographic study, you realize that this is one of the biggest challenges that you have as a teacher. Now, as a researcher, very new, brand new researcher, some of the challenges I had are very similar, but at a different level. When you tell people that you're doing research and that you want to do focus groups and interviews, people tend to think that that's not really research, and they go, ¿y eso para qué? ¿Y eso qué es? Y eso sí sirve. Aren't you supposed to be in a lab, or aren't you supposed to be testing my English? Aren't you supposed to be giving me a test? So it's difficult to get people to participate when they don't think that what you're doing is actually going to have some kind of credibility, or is going to be valid in some way, or is going to prove something. In my particular context, safety has been an issue because I chose to work at El Distrito de Agua Blanca. So getting there, having access to the field, actually visiting neighborhoods, schools, is a problem when you're doing research in this particular kind of context. Maybe another issue that I have faced is the male teachers, male English teachers have kind of said no, they don't want to participate, especially the older male teachers. And when you have only 2 teachers at the school with 3,000 children at a public school in Agua Blanca, and only one of the teachers wants to participate, well, you can't really have a focus group anymore. So that's, you have to change your methodology and your approach, and the actual instruments that you're going to use. So for me, those challenges as a researcher, I don't want to see them as challenges. I want to see them as opportunities for future research, to guarantee myself a job for the rest of my life, I hope. And that's all I have to say from my own personal experience.
We have talked about challenges, dilemmas, and realities. What about solutions?
I don't want to get into that because we have a fourth question that says future direction for applied linguistics.
Good. That's perfectly fine. Okay, so, we have discussed several themes. We have said that it is quite difficult, like the academia has advanced, but we need to go beyond that, right? That is difficult how to do research in our field, because we have to take into account resources, and that it mostly focuses on university level. We've talked about who does research, and we say that probably the teachers who do research are the ones who are doing a master's or the one teaching at university level as well. And Professor Jose mentioned that we are asked to publish outside, but it's quite difficult to get the relevance of what we are doing within our context here in Colombia. So I wanted to ask Diana Margarita Diaz, who is the director of the MA programs here at ICESI University. What can we do, in order to make our field and doing research in our field relevant? Or is that a challenge? Is that a dilemma, or it's not?
Well, there's a dilemma there, actually. Part of what they've mentioned in terms of teachers doing research that is focused to the classroom and reduced only to the classroom, it's something that I've seen, not only in the MA TEFL, but in the Masters in Education that I also coordinate. I think teachers complain that they don't have the time to do research, that schools are not very supportive. The principals might sign the letter saying that they will let the teachers do the research at the school, but if they need extra time, if they need a space, or if they need to go to someone else's classroom, then it becomes difficult for teachers to do research at the schools. Students who are doing their masters, well, they need to graduate, so they work diligently and hard and against all odds to be able to comply with the requirement of doing a research. Sometimes, as Rosalba was saying, they go from reaching for the stars to doing something that will get the requirement out of the way. But, and I think this is where most researchers miss the point of research, what I have seen is that while they are doing the research, it changes them. It changes their practice, it changes who they are, it changes how they see their classrooms. And this has been wonderful to see. The teachers, they were doing, even if it's classroom research, they were doing this in a way, they had been teaching in the same way for, I don't know, 10 years. And then they do their research because they have to. It's a requirement for the MA program. And then they say, okay, fine, how do I improve speaking through the use of, I don't know, labs? Or how do I, I've seen teachers using TPR. I've seen in rural areas, for example, teachers doing productive projects where kids where they make the students, I don't know, prepare cheese as part of their English class and understand that. And they use all sorts of methodologies that they create, they invent. I've seen teachers evaluate the proposals made by the Ministerio de Educación or the suggested curriculum and analyze if it actually works. And in the process of doing so, it changes them. So that's the first thing that I think once teachers, and I am hopeful that once they finish their masters, they won't stop doing research because it has changed them. And they have understood that taking notes and analyzing and being organized of what their students are doing will help them in the end become better teachers. So I am hopeful that research won't end now that we don't have any scholarships for teachers, for example, by the National Ministry of Education. I also think that, and again, teachers who are doing research, mostly school teachers who are doing research are in master's programs. And this is reality, there's nothing we can do about it. But once they become students and they start taking part in academic activities, they want to continue to take part in academic activities. So what I've seen is that they want to go to conferences and they ask the rectores for permission. And even if they don't find funding to go, they'll figure ways out. Like they'll go by bus or they'll sell tickets for a raffle or something so that they can go. So I think they want to be part. And once they start experiencing this being part of an academic community, they kind of get the taste of something nice, and they want to continue doing it. So it might be just wishful thinking, but I think that's important. The other way of making research relevant is to share knowledge with others. What I've seen is that teachers are sharing knowledge at schools, that they are talking to other peers, that they are inviting teachers to join them in their efforts of doing research. And what I've seen is that when they go to schools and they are doing something that is innovative and different, and that kids respond well to that they're doing because of the research that they're carrying out, then other teachers start to become curious. And I think part of being a researcher is for you to do research, you need to be curious. There needs to be intellectual curiosity. You need to be able to want to know more. And I think this is happening, and this is kind of contagious. When you bring something to the school, oh no, this is what I'm doing in my master's program. Vení, contame qué hiciste, and how did you do it, and what did you do, and why are you doing it? And then other people start getting on board. Maybe not at the same level as a master's report that they need to write, but I think that the seed has been planted or is being planted at the moment, and I think that's important. Teachers need to take part of academic communities. I know that time is an issue because most school teachers don't have time. They don't have time to plan, they don't have time to meet. I've seen teachers, for example, the Red de Maestros of the public schools, they meet on Saturdays and Sundays and they do other stuff apart from their job that they're not getting paid for. I think that joining, even if it's online communities, and the good thing about the ELT area and the applied linguistics area is that there are online communities everywhere. Like you click and you'll find that there are teachers from all over the world who share material and have discussion groups, which is important for teachers to join. I think that is an opportunity that we have to explore to give the opportunities to teachers to become part of academic communities, because it's real that during class time we won't be able to take part. But if it's online and if there is an app that you can download and that there is something you can participate, maybe that will make it easier. The other way of promoting research would be like universities. We have research groups and they are usually restricted to our students and to our teachers. Maybe open those up. If someone comes along and says, wait, I work in a school, I'm not in a master's program, I don't take part in it, I'm not a part of this research group, can I join? What can I do? I've seen some of our master's students, when they're in the first semester, they want to join, they want to take part. So open those up. And maybe if the universities, if we decide, okay, fine, we're going to open up the groups and let other people take part in our research, maybe that will help the field as well.
Does any of our panelists want to contribute for this theme particularly?
If that's okay, yes. I was going to say that ISESI does exactly what Diana has just said. And by that, I mean, at the moment, we have, for example, an MA student who graduated in February. And I particularly thought that his work was quite interesting and we should continue it. And we asked Diana if we could, at the time, Diana was the head of the department, and we asked her if she thought we could actually continue and go ahead with it, and she agreed. And at the moment, 8 months later, we're actually coming to the end of collecting the data. So we took an MA student's project into, I don't know if to call it real research or official research for the university, and we have actually worked on that. And that's with one of the two other teachers from the MA, Hector, Alexandra Gomez, and myself, under the supervision of Tim. And, and when our student is actually working, and he's the one who's collected the data, he works at the SENA. So that is, I think, what's the objective of everything that we're doing in our department is to get students to go beyond the classroom, and not only with regards to what they're doing in the research, but to literally go beyond after they graduate from the MA. Also, recently, we had one of our MA students publishing a paper in one of the journals, I think it was How. And also, I think that events like the first poster exhibition and this event here today, that it's actually for us is quite big. It might actually be quite small compared to others, but to have people here who are actually interested in knowing what we're doing and how we're doing it, why we're doing it, it's part of creating an academic research community within our field of applied linguistics that I think is very much needed. So I think that anything that we can do to contribute towards that is important, and I think at ISESI we're doing that. Sorry, I sound like I love ISESI, and I'm doing a lot of marketing and publishing for advertising for ISESI, but it's the fact is that we are doing it, and that's the fact that we can't deny.
Well, okay, so I want to go back to, right, so the item or the theme, which is how can we make applied linguistics and ELT research more relevant in Colombia, right? So I would say that what you said is really important, and I would say that's at a micro level, yeah, that's taking place. But I also think another way of making ELT, applied linguistics research, more relevant in Colombia is that it touches the highest spheres of people who make policy in Colombia. You see, the problem is that we can be here doing all of this work, and yeah, it works, but we're not changing language policy in Colombia, simply because the government does not use the research we produce to create policy, right? So I think if we want to make it more relevant, there has to be some work between those who make policy, those who design policy, and us, those who do research in universities. And this disconnect has been happening for many years in Colombia, and it doesn't change, right? Because the approach is bottom-up. They make the policies, we have to use them, even though we know by experience, by the research we do, that it doesn't work, that does not match realities. But yeah, so we in academia, we've been trying to reach out to the government policymakers, but usually policymakers are not educators. They're administrators, economists, people who are not in touch with what really happens in a classroom in a university or in schools. I do see the light. I see lots of lights because this is another, we haven't even talked about the definition of applied linguistics today, right? You touched upon that in applied linguistics. All right, that's your work. But I wanted to say that the definition of applied linguistics in Colombia has also been very limited to the idea of language problems in the classroom. And the definition is wider. It's problems of language in real life, you know, in which language is connected to problems, real life problems. And that the spectrum is so wide, you know, when you think of it like that. But I think we're doing that, you know, the fact that people are doing research with indigenous communities, all right? That's also, that, or with gay people, with people with disabilities, all of that, you know, it's a way of saying, okay, so applied linguistics is being more relevant to people's lives, not to academic life, right? Okay, I just wanted to say that.
Okay, I would like to go back and talking about, okay, what you said, what you both mentioned. MA students are doing research in their MA programs, but I think it is very, very necessary to create teaching communities to learn, because people who get access to MA programs are not too many compared to the number of teachers we have. And I think we need to reach out the intermediate level, administrators, principals, so they know that teachers need time to share and learn while they teach, okay? Because lack of time is one of the problems teachers have at schools, and even MA students have. When they get interviewed, they say, oh, yes, we have time. After they get admitted, then there is, oh, they don't have time to read this, they don't have time to do that. And at school, time is very limited. People have to teach 20 or more hours, 20, 23, 28, 20, too many hours. So I think we need to reach out that intermediate population, administrators at school, so they understand what they would gain giving the teachers time to do things, to do things that will benefit the students and the school. Okay?
Tim, from your experience as a visiting professor here at ICESI, what do you think it needs to be done in order to reach or to solve those dilemmas or reach that academic expertise?
I wouldn't dare to say what should be done to solve the problems, but I think what I could do is echo what everybody else has said. The key thing here seems to me to be the reductionist and overly instrumental view of what ELT and applied linguistics research is. And when Hector first asked me to talk about this, I was thinking for the last 20 years, virtually all my experience has been with working with teachers, especially on MA programs, here in China, in the UK. So this isn't just a Colombian thing. This is something that happens all over the world. But teachers tend to develop a very narrow view of what legitimate subjects for research are in ELT. And this is because, as has already been pointed out, it is never made clear enough to them what the actual scope of the field is. And when Hector asked me to do this, I thought, okay, I'll scribble down a few things that I would think were extremely relevant, extremely interesting topics for Colombian MA students or would-be teacher researchers to tackle, which I just haven't seen tackled at all. So these were off the top of my head, scribbled down. First, language policy. You've got the Colombia Bilingüe program. You've got these foreign formadores being put into public school classrooms to help, in inverted commas. You've got the whole question of teaching English versus the maintenance of indigenous languages, as Aldemar noted. You've got the question of English being taught at an earlier and earlier stage, even at the age of 6 or 7, when there is, I would have said, virtually no evidence that that is actually, in any economic sense, certainly, worthwhile. And the reason for this, of course, is, as already has been pointed out, the people typically, this is not just Colombia, this is all over the world, typically the people who make decisions at national and regional level about language policy typically have no idea about language at all. And this is a sad fact that we have to work with. So I would have said language policy is the kind of thing which is clearly a relevant area of the field for teachers to do research in. Language attitudes to English. Maria Fernanda has been working slightly, partly on this. Why, if you go to a place like Distrito de Agua Blanca and say, okay, we're going to teach you English, what are people's attitudes to that? Do they register English as being of any potential benefit for them, or do they not? And the larger question, going back to policy, is it actually likely to be of any benefit to them or not? These are the kind of things that we should be researching, and in my humble opinion, they are more interesting and relevant than how do we better develop speaking skills. We could look at the whole question of English as a lingua franca in the Colombian context. And here, Colombia is, well, Latin America is slightly out on a limb, I think, because the recognition or the acknowledgement that the primary role of English in the world is as a global lingua franca seems to hardly have penetrated through to most schools and colleges in Colombia. And we're still working with a context where most people associate English with the United States. There is still a huge emphasis on teaching native speaker norms and particularly North American cultural practice, and nowhere near enough emphasis on intercultural aspects of language teaching. Partly this is an unfortunate accident of history and geography. As to quote Porfirio Díaz, who said, "Pobre México, tan lejos de Dios y tan cerca de Estados Unidos." You have almost the same problem. You're not quite as close as the Mexicans, but you're close enough. And the problem is the gigantic influence of the United States tends to overwhelm the idea of English, so that English becomes solely associated with the United States, whereas outside Latin America it is much easier to perceive that the primary role of English is as a global lingua franca. This has enormous importance for how English is taught, how it's assessed, what materials you use, and all the rest of it. But it's not something that we are really seeing coming out of research at the MA level. We could look at the commercialization of English. Why is nobody, for example, doing what I did recently in my new book and doing a critical analysis of the EF English Town cable TV advertisements about English? How is English sold? And Open English? How is English sold? How is English valued? What are the discourses around English? So there's then also all the ideologies of English and the connections of English to things like, as Aldemar has already pointed out, things like gender, things like sexual orientation, all of this stuff. It's a very, very wide interdisciplinary field, and English language teaching is not or should not be limited solely to what goes on in the classroom. If you're very, very interested in methodology, fine. But not everybody is that interested in methodology. There's a whole world out there, to use Maria Fernanda's phrase, beyond the classroom. So let's look at that.
I'm just so excited. I want to talk. I think that, and I'm going back to what Aldemar said before when he said that in Colombia we're doing a different type of research now in relation to applied linguistics and what Tim is saying. And I think this is basically what has been going on not only here in Colombia but everywhere in the world, because but we're always kind of doing things a bit behind everyone else, but we're doing them. And in the past 10 years, research has moved from what we have all been saying that most students tend to do, which is grammar, phonetics, and that kind of classroom-based research that is so marked as the type of research that many students do. But from 30%, it has reduced in the past few years to 20%, and the focus has been more on the kind of social kind aspects of language, and that includes gender and includes the actual experiences that people live and the process of learning a language. So I think that even though we're going slowly, we are kind of going there, and that is the trend not only here but everywhere. So to have certain research topics being reduced in the past few years and the others increasing, it means that something is happening. And also that even if it's at micro level what we're doing, it's not until we actually make ourselves visible. And by visible, I mean having this type of events, publishing, getting our students to publish and to share that. And when you start to document and you start to make yourself visible, something will have to notice you. And it's only then, and I hope, that we can actually make a difference or have an impact on policies. So it's a start to get there, hopefully one day. I am hopeful, like Diana, that one day we'll do something big and that we can have an impact somewhere with regards to policy.
So from what you have been discussing, you have mentioned these 3 specific items, and I want our last question to be focused on that. You mentioned the word scope a lot to talk about what else can we do as researchers. But you also mentioned creating communities in order to do that, in order to get to that point. And also language policies. I mean, the importance of getting to them, okay? So after everything that we have discussed, what does the future hold for doing research in our context, basically? Yeah?
No, there? Okay. Several universities and other kinds of organizations take part in the Mesa de Bilingüismo, for example. And part of the things that we've been doing is we've been influencing public policy here in Cali. We've sat down with people from the National Ministry of Education. We've taken part in something that they call the Comité Cali Bilingüe, which is to decide on the bilingualism policy for Cali. They've been, Univalle took active part in that process. So did other universities, institutes, la Secretaría de Cultura y Turismo, la Secretaría de Desarrollo Económico. Like there are people, and I know that the process is slow and wish they were, faster and more efficient. But with the Bilingualism Board of Cali, there are people working on it, and we're at least we're thinking about it and trying to influence that situation of public policy in the city. The Language Cooperation Network, where universities in the South take part, they've also been thinking about research that can be done within several universities, like cooperative research. I think part of what we can do in the future and to increase research in the future is not to work alone. Schools have a hard time working with other schools, for example, and if you say, okay, let's see what the bilingualism process is in this school and this other school and this other school. I have friends in 3 different schools, let's get together and work, then it's difficult for them. But the same happens at university level. If we were to do research with people from Javeriana, from Valle, from Santiago, that I see are here, I mean, it'd be great if we could do it and do research together, because we hold like most of the university students in the city, and schools, they can do projects with people in different schools. I think that would be something worth thinking about as well. Creating the academic communities. I think this is what we're trying to do now, but we need to work harder. Maybe we need to make it more formal and invite people more often. Having a research center. Maria Fernanda is already applying for the job. We should have a research center where people can come in with their ideas and then organize research. I mean, that makes sense, no? I'm thinking of, okay.
Well, I don't know if I want it, but okay. Again, coming back to the latest policies concerning English, all the documents that came out in 2016, I think we have to look at, hold on the word suggested that accompanies the curriculum. And probably we have to try to adapt it to our contexts, because many schools had been working on their PAEs, and they had their, their PAEs reflected the needs of the community. They had an orientation, and then comes a national curriculum, which is suggested, but that has evaluation tied to it. I think it would be a very good idea to try to, departing from this curriculum, which is a lot of work and a good help, but try to tie it to the context and try to use the flexibility it offers to make it more situated, more contextualized, more tied to the needs of our institutions. I think that needs to be done, okay? And to develop evaluation and assessment that goes with the curriculum, because still many schools are implementing or trying to implement the new curriculum, but most of the time they prepare for the Saber 11 and they base their evaluations on Saber 11 type exercises. I mean, that's it doesn't make much sense to go with the teaching in one way and then evaluate in another way. So that's something else that needs to be adjusted.
Okay, so I do agree with all of these future directions of ELT in Colombia, communities. I have a couple of points that I think are at the core of this, and one of them is this, what Tim was mentioning, this instrumental view we have of applied linguistics. And this is actually one of the reasons why policymakers don't listen to us. And because, look, you're talking to a policymaker and you're talking about, I'm doing research on identity, right? Identity. And they're like, what does it have to do with learning a language? How does it help kids learn the language faster, right? Because our world as academics and intellectuals is more complex, and learning a language is way much more complex than teaching grammar or vocabulary. Of course, this is out of the minds of these people who work in policymakers, because they're administrators, you know? And we come up with all of these complexities of language learning. They don't have in their minds the idea that the identity, the sexual orientation, may be impacting the attitude of a student towards English language learning, right? So we see this in a more a microscopic way, because we see that in daily life, when we teach, you know. So that's part of the disconnect between policymakers and teachers and academia, you know. That's number one. And the other one is that even people from our field or from other fields, you say like, I'm doing research on gender inequality in the classroom. Like, why are you doing that? You're teaching English, teach the damn verbs, right? You know, like, because this matters, you know. They could be learning English through reflection on these topics. Why not teaching them something about life while they're learning the language, you know? So I guess this is part of what we have to get rid of, the very limited, reductive view of what applied linguistics is and what language learning is for, because that's the other thing, you know. Language learning, you will use it to get a better job, right? And then it's stripped of the social, the cultural benefits, the cognitive benefits, all of this, which matters even more than getting a good job or going to college and so on. So that's, I guess, one of the elements that's at the core of this. And I also want to say that the connection between schools and university, it has to be built. Because what I've seen in my experience is that we have wonderful, brilliant students of master programs, and they do research in schools, and then they say, oh, right, I like this. I want to become an academic. So they go to conferences, they write one article, and so on. And once they do that, they say, I want to go to university, right? And then they quit school, get a job in one university, and that's it. So the possibilities of someone doing research in schools is lost. And then what we have is university professors going to schools to do research, right? They pay the visit to the school, they collect data, and then they come out saying like, this is what's going in schools, what's going on in schools. And well, that's right, but what if someone in the school would do the research? Yes?
Just to, I told you I was going to try and sell my book to you. Well, Jose Aldemar is actually doing it for me, which is excellent. But the book is called Rethinking TESOL, and the essential premise of it is that the real job. Thank you, Hector. What is the real area of expertise of an English language teacher? All too often, it is assumed to be able to speak English well, to know something about the language, and to have some methodological expertise, pedagogic expertise. We argue in this book that it goes much further than that, and that actually there are at least three elements to teachers' expertise, or should be. The language, yes. The methodology or the pedagogy or the approach or whatever you want, fine, yes. The third one is some knowledge of how language works. This is an identity that so many language teachers, especially English language teachers, all over the world are very reluctant to take up. And they prefer to say, oh, I'm just an English teacher, I don't really know anything about difficult linguistics or socio-cultural things. No, I just teach the damn verbs. Exactly. And then English language teachers wonder why it is that policymakers don't listen to them. And if they are not owning the discipline of language study, if they are not serious about language, if they present themselves as simply skills trainers, then it's hardly surprising that policymakers don't listen to them. And therefore, I would like to see a thoroughgoing rethink of how English language teachers are trained, which would include a really solid grounding, not only in the scope of the discipline that we've been discussing, but also in the language side of English language teaching. If you're not an expert in language teaching, how can you call yourself a language teacher? And if you're not an expert in language teaching, why would you expect your bilingual coordinator or your head teacher or your policy maker at national government level, why would you expect them to listen to you?
We have a couple of questions from the audience, okay? So I organized them by themes, the ones that we've been discussing, and I'm gonna go with them. First one, it says, what about applied linguistics used in the health field? Or maybe we can run it up, yes, to different fields. What about applied linguistics used in different areas? Specifically, it says health field, but I mean, we can talk about different areas as well. I think that that's connected with what Jose Aldemar mentioned before, when he was talking that we think that applied linguistics is only for the academia, but not for real life. So what about that? Maybe we can tackle it from that point of view.
Well, the definition of applied linguistics is the application of academic research to language, real life language problems. So that would clearly involve health as well as a whole spectrum of other contexts. But generally, certainly in the United States tradition, applied linguistics has been understood to apply to more than anything to language learning and teaching. And I think possibly we're now beginning to see why this has been historically a weakness. Having said that, I think we're talking largely to an audience of language teachers, aren't we? And in that sense, I'm not sure that I can't quite see the relevance to health. But is there a relevance of applied linguistics to health? Most certainly there is, yes. And we could easily be sitting here with a different audience of people who are interested in the applications of applied linguistics to health, without a doubt, yeah.
Yeah, there is actually the area of English for specific purposes that's in charge of teaching English to people from different areas, like people from the health areas. Well, yeah, I mean, that takes care of the issues that have to do on how to teach it in those contexts, and basically focuses on learning English through content-based instruction.
That's okay. All right. I mean, two types of application, which is not really like use of applied linguistics beyond the classroom and our area. For example, when I went to the applied linguistics program in England, we had one person who worked on television, who was like a TV star in communications. We had speech therapists. And today at Universidad del Valle, we have courses for speech therapists of the Hospital Universitario. There was a very interesting research project from someone who was working on human rights. Like, what happens to people who come to Colombia to go through Colombia and finally go to the States? If they are detained, what happened to them? What happens to them? Do they have translators for the defense, or what to say what their situation is? Many of them are from, we only think of people from Venezuela going through, and no, but we have people from Oriental countries, from African countries, we have people who come to, I don't know, it's like the migration route is quite difficult to understand, but they end up here trying to cross Chocó, El Tapón del Darién, and sometimes they are detained, and they don't have anyone who speaks the language and who can help them expose a case and help them in their situation. This guy in the maestría en maestría en estudios interlingüísticos e interculturales, was working on that. I mean, the rights of immigrants or people who use Colombia as way to go somewhere else. And for me, that's a very interesting way of putting language and applied linguistics together. We also had someone working, an immigrant, okay, a second generation of Arab, working on the stories of all people who came up, first generation immigrants from Libya, from Lebanon, I think Lebanon, and collecting their stories and analyzing them not only linguistically but culturally. And I mean, these are very interesting things. We had this other two students working on translation of stories written by Colombian teenagers in Colombian schools to make them public, okay, at the international level, because they were only known at their schools. They won a contest, and that was it. And she wanted to make that to make the stories known, and through translation and the analysis of the stories to see the cultural part. So I mean, there are many things that can be done, okay, beyond the classroom.
I was just wondering whether the question that was, what about applied linguistics in the health field, did not necessarily refer to teaching English for people in that particular field, but how to do research in applied linguistics in the health field. And for me, that could maybe be something approach from the language that a doctor needs to use in order to tell someone who's very sick about an illness, or the way that people with certain health problems need to be approached, and the type of language that someone needs to use to address those people. So in that sense, I can definitely see applied linguistics being used in the health field.
Yes, that's what that's what I was going to say. There's actually a lot of research on this, on patient-doctor communication, from discourse analysis, from intercultural perspectives, intercultural communication. Yeah, so it's been researched a lot, actually.
I think I can group these three questions. Okay. What do you think the best outcome for our context would be if we go into teaching non-standard English in the classroom? Those three questions focus on
What would the best outcome be?
outcome. Yeah, because
What would the outcome be?
yeah, they are asking about the challenges, our opinion about teaching
Yeah.
non-standard English.
Yeah.
So I think that
Right. Well,
what would be the outcome out of it?
Right. Let's be very clear here. I am not advocating teaching non-standard English as if it were standard English, and I am not advocating that students should write in non-standard English in their exams. I know this is one of my pet enthusiasms, and I know there's a history here, but bear with me. I am not advocating the teaching of non-standard English as if it was standard. When I talk about taking seriously the idea of English as a lingua franca, what I mean is raising students' awareness of how English actually works in the world, and giving them some exposure to the kind of English that they are likely to come across if and when they finally start using English. Students who assume that all English use is standard and is native are in for a horrible shock when they actually start speaking English in the world. If the teacher does not prepare them for that shock, then the teacher is not doing their job properly. I apologize if I didn't make it clear before. That is what I meant by taking seriously English as a lingua franca usage. It means preparing students for in terms of things like understanding communication, concentrating on intelligibility and comprehensibility rather than a native accent, all of these sorts of things. I am not saying that they should write non-standard English in their exams, and I'm not saying that you should teach it as if it were a standard. In my opinion, a student who understands things like non-standard usage versus standard, native speaker usage versus non-native speaker usage, regional accents, non-native speaker accents, and all the rest of it, a student who has the language awareness to be able to deal with those kinds of things is not less likely to write standard English in their exams. They're more likely to write standard English in their exams because they understand the importance of appropriacy, and they have picked up, hopefully, in our classes, some measure of language awareness.
Well, okay, so this is actually a very problematic concept. How many of you speak standard Spanish? So what is standard Spanish?
I speak standard Peruvian.
I guess you speak the Spanish you learned in the context of a group of people who really, I don't know how much you were able to compare the Spanish Peruvian to all of the broader population of Peru. Just like in Colombia, really hard for us to say this is standard Spanish of Cali. I guess that's standard Spanish of Cali, which I would say is just a variety of Spanish in Colombia. And then you use the same logic in English, you know, like I speak the English that I've been able to co-construct with the people I've interacted in my life, which I don't really, what kind of standard variety it corresponds to. Is just, English is just the product of my own identity, which is really varied, and I guess it must be similar to you. Saying like you're teaching standard English in Colombia is because when you go abroad, you realize that you were not really learning the standard variety. You know, because you speak very different from what other people, the way other people speak. So like, okay, wait a minute. I was taught variety, standard variety of English, but everybody sounds different to me. You know? So what kind of standard thing I was learning? All right? So the term is really problematic. Yes, so I don't want to mess with that term, actually.
I don't even want to talk about it.
We can group these two questions. English teacher status has been undervalued. What can be done to dignify the English teacher's profession?
Okay. Well, I would say not English teachers, but the teaching profession. We hear stories of times gone by, a long time gone, times in which the teachers were respected in the towns, and I mean, that is ancient history, because our society values power and money, and teachers don't make much money and are not in positions of power. But I would say that something we can do is be well prepared. I mean, if you know what you're doing, if you try to learn more, if you try to improve your teaching skills, if you do research, that's something that is very important. I mean, research was for other professions. And we thought that, we thought of capital R for research. We were scared. No, we have to go into research and do it as seriously as we can, and I mean, publish and participate in learning communities and make visible your work And with preparation, you can have like, I'm going to use oppose, but not necessarily like fighting for things, but you can, with knowledge, you can be knowledgeable about things to discuss, for example, policies, and to try to earn spaces. And preparation. If you're good, and you're recognized, okay? So I would say that something we can do is be well prepared and be lifelong learners, because we are not going to get everything in language programs, okay? But we need to position our work, okay, with very good elements, and preparation is one of them.
Just to add to that, which as I said before, the English language teacher should be positioning themselves within their institution as the language expert. And as Rosalba says, preparing yourself means that. The professional worker with language, that's what an English language teacher is. And if you want respect, that's how you earn it. I'm not guaranteeing it'll get you any more money, but it might at least get you some respect within your institution. And if you do seriously educate yourself through do research about things like language policy and so on, and the ideological aspects of language, that's how you develop a reputation within your institution. The English language teacher should be positioning themselves within their institution as the language expert, and not the person who happens to speak English.
Okay. So please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But to conclude, I think that is very important if we mention, for example, the challenges. Scope, sometimes we need to work on that. I mean, we have made some advances, but we need to still working on the scope. Stop focusing just in skills and take a look at what other fields we have over there. The importance of creating communities, for example. Working on language policies, since it's a very important field that we need to discuss, because, I mean, teachers are not the one working on those policies. I also got, we need to open doors. We need to find ways to keep teachers doing research in schools instead of having this trend of teachers moving to university level. And something else that you would like to add really quickly, just to finish.
Well, those of you who, I'm sorry, somebody else want to? I know this is very hard, and I stopped doing that, saying that to my students at some point, because sometimes we see like a very blurred future in our country. But I would say something we can do is stay. I mean, you're good. You have received a good education here. You go abroad, get a better preparation, go to higher levels. Please come back. We need you. And I know it is very difficult to say it when you go to a school and you don't make much money, when you have to work too many hours. But I mean, we won't change things if all the good ones go abroad and stay. And we see, but just people, especially in languages, there are many chances of traveling and falling in love with another country and with people in other countries, and getting good money, and forgetting about Colombia. Please go, but come back.
Thank you very much. We have a big contribution for language integrated resources. So we're gonna do a raffle. We're gonna use the registration format that we got at the beginning. Is everybody here registered? Yes?
Okay, we have 106 attendees.
So
which
some
is
of our
great.
panelists maybe can
A
give me a number
from 1 to 106.
from 1 to 106.
Any number.
Any number, please. 71.
Isabela Collazos.
Is Isabella here? She's not here.
In the other classroom,
Is she? Do we have a monitor in 2019?
she
She left? Okay. Another
Isabela
one,
1, Isabela 2, Isabela 3,
please. 55.
Sergio Nicolás Cadena. Another one.
Another number.
One number, any number. In the other room? I think
He's
they're
not in the other room.
kids, are they there? No. Do we have? Jaime Alberto Valencia. Oh, finally one. Another number, please. One. Adiela Rendon Gil. Oh, she came first, but she left first too. Next. 5. Andrés Torres. Another. For 1 to 106. 90. We have Keren Renteria from the house. Keren? Oh, another number. Leslie Tatiana Ángel González. Let's see if she comes. Another number. Leslie, come here. We're waiting for you. We got one more. No, two more. My God. Another number. Yeah. Another one. 25. Jimena Frankie Castrillon. Oh. It's a coincidence. She's one of our teachers. Just a coincidence. Leslie? Yeah, Leslie's here. It's a big one. Okay? And the last one. I choose the number. Number, because I say, what? 12. Claudia Patricia Cubillos. Oh, fine. Okay, thank you very much. Before you go, we have the posters next door. So we have 6. Oh, the academic posters we have it next door, so you can take a look at them. So research some of our MA students have been doing. So please, you're welcome. There you go. Thank you very much, please, for our panelists. Our monitors will take you next door and show you what it is, okay? Take a look at it. You can have some coffee. I want one of those dictionaries from me.